Welcome to the Early Years Spark podcast. I'm Tati Bueno and I'm here with my co-host.
Konstantina Moustaka. Hello, everybody.
Today we have the amazing
Samantha Dholakia. She is an experienced educator and executive coach with nearly 15 years of expertise across key stages. She is the founding director of the amazing SPD Tuition and Coaching, and she's the creator of the Behaviour balance system, which is a collective approach that supports behavior through emotional regulation and accelerates academic success. She is a consultant, trainer, a parental strategist. She's a children's confidence coach specializing in behavior change. She's really dedicated to creating positive learning experiences that really empower educators and parents and children, allowing them to thrive.
Yeah, so our conversation revolves around regulation, identifying the root cause of behavior, what is behind, what is the need that the child is expressing and that needs to be met. So understanding behavior,
support connection as well, yes.
Practical strategies for you practitioners and parents that are listening to us to put in practice in your home as well. It's a brilliant conversation.
I thought we can start talking a little bit about the importance of emotional regulation in a setting and with children in general.
Let's talk about the big topic of today's session, behaviour and emotional regulation, which is my absolute favourite topic to discuss, as you both know, and endlessly. And I think that this is one of the most important things that we can share within the childcare and education industries and services, because we do not know enough collectively about our children's developing brains and emotional regulation and connection and all the lovely things that we're going to cover today, because we aren't trained in it when we first go into these roles. I have been in education and childcare for best part of 20 years now, which is always interesting when you look back over your time. And when I first trained, I was not taught any of the stuff that I now know. I only have learned and practiced this since going into the coaching industry, exploring neuroscience, going into the world of psychology, and bringing all of those elements together to create what we now have as the behaviour balance system. So what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about what emotional regulation is first. Emotional regulation is the ability to regulate within your nervous system, your emotions, being able to experience emotions, whether they are big or small, but then coming back to a sense of balance. And we talk about this a lot within the system that we've created. We share this a lot when we deliver teacher training, parental workshops and things like that, because sometimes I think as grown-ups, we forget how hard that really is. You know, even as adults walking around in the world, you know, we see each other dysregulated a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
You know, I can pull all my hands up. I'm absolutely human too. We all get dysregulated, and dysregulation is not only, you know, the really big challenging emotions of fear or, you know, distress or stress or upset, anger. There's also the element of huge excitement. You know, it's both sides of the scale, if you like, that doesn't feel like a central point. So what we want to achieve and what we want to do is we want to focus really on what co-regulation allows us to do. And the beauty of this, in my very humble opinion, is that we are such social beings, and that actually we are constantly co-regulating each other. And that basically means that our brains are communicating all the time without words. They do this through our nervous system, through our senses, through our understanding, predictions of each other and all that sort of thing. I won't go too much into the science behind it because we don't have that long. But basically we can talk to each other without actually talking to each other, which is exciting, but also a little bit concerning because, you know, we're not always standing guard at what we're passing out into the world. So co-regulation is that process of being able to regulate another human using your own nervous system. And one of the best examples of this, I guess, is when we have newborn babies or really tiny babies, and we give them skin on skin contact, or we bring them in and we slow our heart rate down, we take some big breaths and we watch them physically relax. And this doesn't stop when they're young and when they're newborn. This continues all the way through. And I absolutely do teacher training of all ages and stages. And we talk about co-regulation the whole way through.
It's not only for parents and regulating children with parents, but it's also later on when they go to nursery and then when they go to school, how we get that co-regulation between practitioners and the children as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And yeah, each other,
Yeah.
so we have shared regulation where children are able to regulate each other. We have, we talk a lot about self-regulation within the education system, within the childcare settings environment. And actually, most behavior is self-regulation. It's not desired self-regulation. It's not what we're aiming for. It's not necessarily what we're feeling most comfortable with at the time when someone else is dysregulated, but trying to feel better in the moment and doing things that aren't necessarily providing outcomes that we want. But every type of behavior that someone is going through is trying to make themselves feel better. It might be misguided or not guided at all, or, misunderstood in some aspects. But actually, that's what we're looking at when we're talking about behavior. So when we see a child getting really mad and throwing something or screaming at someone, they are trying to get that emotion out. They're trying to regulate themselves by just, exploding it out into the world because they don't know what to do with it. And what happens when we regulate or don't, in some cases, each other, is sometimes staff members or parents meet that with, I don't know what to do with it either. So I'm going to put it all out into the world as well. And I'm going to maybe raise my voice or send you away or, all of these things, because what happens is their little nervous system is screaming, I'm not safe. I don't feel safe. This environment isn't safe. And then our big nervous system is like, oh my goodness, this environment isn't safe. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't feel safe either. And then we can't co-regulate in the way that we want to because we're both, in that realm of unsafety, if you like, emotional unsafety. So co-regulation is so crucial, as you said, for practitioners and educators and for parents and carers, because once we're aware of this, superpower that we have as humans to regulate the world around us, and once we start doing it consciously, we can make such a huge impact. So this might be, we have something that we like to use in our TBBS, which is the Behaviour Balance System. And for anyone listening to this who is a Behaviour Bank member, you have access to all of that in the download section. But this comes in the form of the road to regulation for our behaviour support approach. And we use support rather than manage because we don't want to manage behaviour. We want to support it through the process. We get some arms in the air for this.
Music to our ears.
Absolutely. So the road to regulation takes them through that process of recognition of what's going on internally and externally. It teaches the skills behind the behavior and the skills behind emotional regulation. We use our balance baskets, we have our balance zones, we have a whole system that we put into different settings, schools, nurseries and homes as well. It's a 360 approach, but with the aim that we can teach children how to regulate rather than expecting them to do it independently. So it's a big system. It's only a small mission I'm on to change the approach of behaviour across the world. But we're on it. We're doing it. It's happening.
How do you then recognize what's going on with a child to then understand how to support them? And when we're talking about support, what are we supporting? Because we were saying to support them to co-regulate and regulate themselves, but then I've seen in the setting with the other practitioners that people are trying to achieve different things with a so-called support. So what should we be aiming for?
And I think this is really important, isn't it? Because consistency is key. So to answer the first part of that question, what we are first of all trying to support is the element of connection. So when it comes to any form of emotional regulation and co-regulation, you have to be connected for that to happen. Disconnect means that children feel isolated. Again, it feeds the fear of, being rejected and that sort of thing, which is a very triggering emotion, because it's the one feeling or the one emotion, the one scenario that doesn't bode well for young people and children, generally speaking, if they're not connected to the world around them. It endangers them, that survival need kicks in hugely, because of course it's the biggest fear we have. In fact, it's just a fun brain fact, but the emotional rejection in our brain, the physiological reaction or neurological reaction that we have, is actually very, very similar, if not identical, to the physical pain experienced. So emotional rejection and that pain and physical pain in terms of brain response are incredibly similar, if not the same, in a lot of aspects. So for our children, connection is absolutely key. And what we have found over the years, the behaviorist approaches and particularly looking at things like timeouts and consequential behavior strategies that are led with punishments, and if you don't, this will happen, and if you don't, this will happen, that don't necessarily correlate. There's no logic to a lot of the things that are doled out in those scenarios. They create a massive disconnect. They isolate, and that prevents co-regulation taking place in the way that we want it to. It prevents the idea that we can de-escalate behavior really quickly, or at least really safely for all involved. So when we're thinking about what we're supporting connection, we're supporting understanding and empathy, and we're supporting their model of the world. And again, this is absolutely my opinion, but my opinion is based on a whole lot of research. Everything we do is completely science-backed and research-led. All of our approaches have been tried and tested, and they are constantly being ironed out. We have a whole range of settings and families that are living the behavior balance system and coming back and feeding back, and it's always a work in progress, because working with children is completely unpredictable at times. But the idea here is that we are all learning and growing together, and I think we want that model of the world for our children. And when we start to prioritize connection in the toughest of times for our children, what we're saying to them is, what you're going through isn't scary to me, because I've been through it and I get it and I understand, and I'm here to help you, and we can do it together, and as adults with fully developed brains, we get that privilege. It's a privilege that comes with a whole bag of guilt if we're parents, because we're always getting it wrong as parents. It's great fun. Even when we're getting it right, we're getting it wrong. And as practitioner, it comes with a whole bag of stress, because you've got all of these amazing, incredible human beings around you that you just want to thrive in everything that they do. And the pressure we put on ourselves as practitioners and educators is great. If you're a parent and an educator like myself, you get the double wham, which is awesome. We love those big rocks in the rucksack. But it really is about making sure that you're kind to yourself as you go through this process, because what they see, what they sense, most importantly, because that's a huge part of the deal, and what they hear impacts what they think and experience and put out into the world. So if they have a huge emotion and it's an explosive experience for them, and then you mirror it, they're like, well, this is just the jam, this is just it, this is what happens. Whereas if you then kind of meet them where they are with understanding and empathy, and then bring them back down to a sense of balance, and teach them that when that happens, this is what we can do to help ourselves feel better, this is what we can try, and sometimes it doesn't work, so there's alternatives. This is the way that we are going to support a positive, healthy model of the world when it comes to emotional regulation and behavior.
And you mentioned about the brain, but how does that whole body and moving and movement, what role that plays in regulation part?
Absolutely. I love that you've brought this up. This is so important, because we are not, I can't remember where did I feel like I've read this in a book recently. I can't take credit for this, but I don't know who to credit. So but I read about a phrase that said that we are not brains on sticks. And it has stuck in my mind ever since. And my goodness, I really wish I knew which book it was, because I've read so many books, But it's such a wonderful image to have, because
It
we
is.
absolutely are not. And one of the things that we are huge on is movement, but not just, random movement and collective movement. The right movement at the right time for the right child is going to get the right outcome. And that's why in the behavior balance system, we have a huge push on how they can use movement. We, within our educational support and our consultancy and the programs we have there, we have whole day plans and lesson support that we can, use so that they bring movement in, because some children need more input and some children need less. And we need to understand sensory input in order to manage that. I've walked into so many classrooms, and I have to admit, sometimes I'm like, well, they're doing something about this, so hats off to them, because not all classes have any movement. So I'm always really pleased when I see some movement happening anyway. But I still kind of get stuck on the barrier of, okay, so we're doing a whole class dance right now, but we've got children that want to climb the walls and children that want to sink into the floor. And you can see it happening, and you can see the teachers' kind of stress levels accumulating, because they're like, oh my goodness, this is not working, but I know I need to use movement. And I think it's just understanding that some brains are managing sensory input very differently to other brains. We are all neuro diverse, and we all have a different setup. In fact, I had a wonderful meeting with a trainer who specifically trains on neurodiversity yesterday, and we met for coffee, and we could have talked about this for hours and hours. If it wasn't for the parking being up, we probably would have stayed there for hours. But the idea that we want to, and this is why everything we do with TBBS is neuroaffirming and inclusive and collaborative and all of that jazz, because we want to create a system that supports every brain. Every child should not have a separate recognized approach, that is separating children, not bringing them together. And what do we know about children and humans? We want to be together. We're social beings. We need connection. There's one surefire way to disconnect your community, and that is to point out and segregate difference. And we don't want that for our young people. We want them to feel absolutely part of our team, because they're all incredible and they bring such amazing resources to our classrooms and our nurseries. So making sure that we have an approach that supports them with that and enables them to feel celebrated for every single one of them's difference, because they're all different. All our brains are different. They're like fingerprints. So we want to celebrate that, and we want to teach them about that. So having a neuroaffirming approach, having an approach that suits all of them and includes the right movement at the right time is just so powerful.
Oh, that's amazing. It makes such an affirmation for us that having you, it's the perfect guest for us. Because everything that you're saying, I would say it's pretty much the reason why we started the podcast, because it's what Konstantina and I have been talking and trying to do in our setting, because we work in different rooms, and it's so hard for everybody to understand that and to be on the same page, because of course there's different backgrounds. We all are from different nationalities, so everybody brings that baggage with them, and to understand that and recognize that in the children is such a challenge. So hearing you saying that, it's just, it's very reaffirming.
Definitely.
I think as well, with that, you sharing that, it really is about recognizing that we all see it through our own eyes, everything through our own eyes. And just to, refer back to the brain, because that's what we're here for. Our brain has a really unique filter system. Every brain does. So our own experiences and memories and judgments of the world, whether we felt safe at different times in our lives, our own, growing and adapting and pruning, if you like, all of those things have taken place for us. So our responses and reactions and windows of tolerance, a little nod to Dan Siegel's work there, our own ability to regulate everything is is down to personal experience. And I think as well, having compassion for each other as adults in our settings, and our schools and our homes as well, and families, is so important, you know, because generation on generation things change, approaches change. I work with lots of our TBBS families on this, where they're, you know, told something by their families, or, you know, and they're like, but I don't agree. And it's because everyone knows what they know at that time and sees it from their own perspective and eyes. And I think co-regulation is so important, because as I said before, we regulate all grown-ups regulate each other as well. So if you walk into a staff room and it's really miserable and everyone's flat and it's just tough and it's hard, and you understand that, it's going to have such an impact on our young people, but also on our experience on a day-to-day basis. So having compassion for each other and just being able to hoik each other up when we need it, and, you know, give each other a bit of a, you know, a hug or even a pep talk every now and again. I remember colleagues doing that with me and me doing that with them over the years, makes such a difference, because we are doing it together. You know, we are always better together.
And touching in that, what would be ideal utopic environment? What are the steps to achieve that? Because of course, different backgrounds with different socioeconomical situations. What is what we strive for, and what steps can we take to get there?
I think we're talking about two environments, aren't we? We're talking about internal environment, and we're talking about external environment. I think in terms of your internal environment, we want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of behavior patterns and things like that, you know, being able to spot what it is that's happening, when it's happening. Tracking is so important. We don't talk about tracking behavior enough. We talk about, you know, behavioral consequences and ladders of consequence and spirals and those sorts of things. But what we don't talk about actually is tracking behavior patterns, not for a purpose that is in turn negative, but a purpose that is useful. Everything we need to be doing environmentally when it comes to internal environments needs to be useful, and then the same needs to be set in place for the external environments. And I think this is something that is huge, because classrooms are all different, nurseries are all different, settings are all different, homes are all different. And I think that the most important of the both environments is the internal, because if you manage your internal world, you're much better off in a much more secure place to manage the external. But when we're talking about external worlds, what we want really is to have things in place for sensory input. Whether that, and for us in our approach, we have our balance zones and we have our baskets for sensory input. And that includes big muscle movements, small muscle movements, a whole host of input that will help regulation, and in turn, focus and attention and connection. And then, of course, there are other things like, you know, trying not to have things that are overstimulating for children that are easily stimulated, you know, or often find that sensory input is too high. Having an area like our balance zone is really important, because we want an area. And I often hear people talking about calm corners. And this is something that, you know, I'm sure there will be umpteen people that disagree with me here, and that's okay. I'm here for that. I love a discussion. And if we didn't disagree with each other on things, we'd never move forward, right? So we have to have these discussions. But in my very humble opinion is that we don't want children to constantly live in a place of calm. We don't want passive learners. We want excited, engaged learners, and that's of all ages. And we want them to experience a whole host of things. We don't want them to live in the beige. We want them to live in a range of vibrant colors, experiencing the vibrations in different ways, working themselves up and then bringing themselves back down, and then going that bit further and bringing themselves back up, because practice makes progress. And if we don't allow for that, if we don't allow children to practice those skills in our safe spaces that we're creating environmentally, then they won't have those skills moving forwards into the world. You know, they become angry drivers. We've all been in those traffic jams together. And what we want is children to be able to practice and learn that process. So I think that we need to referring back to the sensory input, is have less of a focus on keeping children calm and have more of a focus on teaching children how to move up in energy, move back down in energy, you know, and go between. So balancing that out, which is why we don't have calm corners in TBBS. We have balance zones, because we know that some children will be sitting there falling asleep, you know, talking, you know, primary age, if not secondary at the moment in this scenario, but they might be getting there and they might be feeling lethargic and, you know, kind of opting out a little bit, and they can feel their energy plummeting, you know. So we want an area where they can go and they can kind of jump it out, or they can do a big energy movement to bring themselves back up again and then be ready. Other children are going to be sitting there kind of like, oh, I got to move, I got to get this out, you know, I got to bring it back down again. And they might have, you know, that energy that's a little bit higher that they want to bring to a calm. So I think, you know, having an area to balance it out is really important. So when we come into settings and we support nurseries, primary, secondaries, whoever, that's one thing that we look at, is how are you providing opportunities to balance out energy, to balance out emotional vibrations, and to teach through that process. So for me, that's such an important element when it comes to environment. And of course, there's so many other elements. I mean, environment's a huge topic, as are all of these. You know, things like having furniture that fits children, you know, having flexible seating. The coverage on this is huge. Even things like lighting, access to water. Children should be free to drink and toilet whenever they need. We should never have a rule about either of those things, because they need to practice learning to listen and respond to their bodies. I could literally shout that from the rooftops. The amount of times I have spoken to people in different settings that are like, no, the children can't use the toilet at this time because it's this time. And I'm like, no. No, thank you. Let's not do that. We don't want urine infections. We want children that are healthy. But you know, having that experience is really important. So just practicing that, and you can practice that from nursery all the way through. You know, having this set up, having lights in your rooms, having, you know, access to things having access to things that they might need to use to express themselves, different levels to be on. The amount of things that we could talk about in environment is huge, you know. But I think when we are covering these topics, it's important to, you know, speak about both environments, the internal and the external. And as I said before, if anyone listening to this is a Behaviour Bank member, there is so much that they can download when it comes to setting these up. They're not alone. You're not alone, guys. We're here to help.
If you can give a top tip to practitioners on when they have a child that is dysregulated, what do you think will be the first thing that they can do that will bring that child down, let's say, to a more regulated state?
I think this is a great question. I think everyone needs to breathe, because your first, and I know that sounds so cheesy, and everyone's like, probably, I can feel the eye rolls as they listen to this, like, oh yes, there we go, breathe, yes, you know, like we're not breathing already, Sam. But actually, the toughest thing to do when you are getting dysregulated yourself, even when you don't notice it, you know, it's almost like the boiled frog, isn't it? You know, it's a terrible analogy, but you know, that we're not aware of that happening until it's there. And you know, making sure that you do just, and I practice this as a parent and a practitioner, you know, and I literally will kind of take okay, let's see what's happening here kind of moment. And my friends laugh because they're like, there's the breath, there it is. But I started to do it really kind of enthusiastically, if you like. One, because I needed to, for myself, to remember it. I needed it to be a little bit jovial, because that helped. But also because it models that to them. So now, I mean, as parents listening to this, now my son goes, okay, mummy. And will breathe back at me.
He does exactly the same.
Yeah, it's been a very clear model of the world for him, that before we start any deep conversations, we take a breath. But that's great, because it stops that escalation, which is fab.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, if you haven't made yourself giggle in the process, you know, you're at least ready to move on. And then once you have taken a breath, just assess the situation from that breath, from those eyes. It's like they're doing the best they can with what they've got. What is it they're finding hard? Because ultimately all children are just trying to, they're trying to get to something. They're not just trying to irritate us. They are trying to achieve something, meet a need, or, do something or other that's not working. And let's face it, even as grown-ups, when something doesn't go our way, it's not ideal. We don't love that.
Yes, that's true. Very true. So the
breathe
same
and
you would
assess
say
it.
about parents, like you will give the same tip to
Yeah,
parents,
yeah,
that first breath.
absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
it's so
And I
important.
think, when you're in a room with lots of children, it is hard, but when you're in a room with your children, sometimes it's harder.
Harder.
Because that connection is so different. And I probably would never have said that before I had done both. As a practitioner before, I probably, would never have said that. But now I have done both sides of the fence on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis. I think that actually we both need that breath. We both need to be using it. And of course, the more we model together the same approach, the same language. This is why the Behaviour Bank is 360 for educators and for parents. It's why our TBBS approach, supports both workshops for parents and for educators and practitioners. Because ultimately, if we're using the same terminology, modeling the same breathing, we're all doing it together, then the children are getting that consistency, and that is going to help them no end when they start to put the evidence in place for understanding the world around them and responding to it.
And Sam, you're talking about tracking behavior.
Yes.
How do you track behavior?
So I am not referring to the ABC forms, no. Less said on that. So we have our pattern trackers. In fact, Cheryl, who I was talking to yesterday, has her trust what were they, tracking or like profiles?
I've
yes
seen that. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
Brilliant.
So there are other versions out there that are different in approach to the ABC forms. And the reason for that is because we are not going to consequence.
Yes.
Consequences are, and this does not mean that there are no consequences. It just means that they are, that we have lots of natural consequences in the world. If a child touches something hot, they get burnt. And that is a natural consequence of an action. And again, my opinion on this is that, not that I want any children to get burnt. I have full disclaimer there, We're not looking to burn children. We don't want that, okay, guys? We don't want that. But I'm just, using that as an example of kind of natural consequence. But what we want is a logical consequence, a connected consequence to, I'll use a personal example if you're okay with that. The other day, my son refused to brush his teeth in time to make it to tennis. And I had said to him, unfortunately, we've got 10 minutes. We've got to leave in 10 minutes. If you don't want to brush your teeth now, we're going to miss tennis because it will have already started. And I don't go places if I'm late. I don't like being late to things. I'd like to be, I have a little bit of a concern if I'm running late. I don't love that. So my rule is I'm either early or on time. This is it. So I said to him, we're not going to miss half of your game, your tennis game. That's not what's going to happen. So you're either going to do the teeth brushing now, or we're going to procrastinate, and it's going to drag on, and that's fine. But it means we'll miss tennis, unfortunately. So he in true style of most young children, he didn't believe me, and he thought he'd still win tennis, which he did not. And afterwards he said, "Oh, next time I'm going to be quicker at doing my teeth." I said to him, "Yeah, maybe we could try that next week." And he was. I hasten to add, the following week he was a darn sight quicker. In fact, he brought me the toothbrush, and he does not love brushing his teeth. And he was like, "Come on, because we don't want to miss tennis." Now, That was not me losing my temper and saying, right, if you don't brush your teeth, we're not going to tennis. Blah, 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 blah. It was me saying, listen,
the situation. This
the
is how
boundary is that we don't go to places if we're really late. Like, that's not what happens. So I'm going to hold my boundary with love. And I took him and we played tennis in the garden, and we still had fun together because I wasn't going to ruin the day over, slow teeth brushing. But ultimately, he learned from that logical sequence of events, and that's what we want for children. So tracking a pattern of behavior when it comes to challenging behavior, particularly, and not a challenge for the children are not challenging, we find it challenging. I just want to kind of like put that out there, and I'll probably get again the eye rolls, I feel them, but the idea
Can you feel the hands up in the
I
air as
can feel the
well?
hands up in the air as well. Yeah, I can. But sometimes, when we hear these things, we're like, really though, like it is a challenge, but it's a challenge for us, not, it's not them. It is us, because it's our internal world that we are mastering or trying to, it's an ongoing process for all of us. So what we want to do is we want to track those patterns of behavior so that we can see when and why and how, and we can start making those small tweaks, and we can start seeing what the knock-on effect is. Because ultimately, if you have a child who is finding something really tough, and that's what behavior, the kinds of behavior we're talking about here are all about, is that struggle that they have. If they're finding that hard, what knock-on effect is that having, and what came before it? Again, we use that 360 approach. In the bank, we've got a sleep coach, a nutritionalist, a psychotherapist, we've got so many other elements in the bank, speech and language therapist as well, because of the communication element. There's so many things that impact our behavior before it happens. And we want to make sure that we are tracking that, and we always support settings and parents in having that connection together, because we know that you can't track alone. If you have a child that comes into your setting and you're like, right, on Monday, he did this, 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 and this. On Tuesday, he did this, 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 and this. What was the same? What was different? And you're like, I don't know. I can't tell what was the same, what was different. You're going to need to collaborate with the parents and be like, we love your child. We want to help your child. Help us out here. Fill in the blanks, because we're not sure what happened before. Did he have a tough night's sleep? Because let's face it, grown-ups, if we don't sleep, it's horrible. Is he coming in hungry because he doesn't want to eat breakfast straight away? Is whatever it is. And I think having that tracking is so informative, and I think that's the key word. Tracking should be informative. It should not be leading to punitive punishments and consequences. So that's the difference, I think, in approach there. And I think
it's another reason why parent partnership is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. We're all in it together. We all want the best for these little humans.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Sam, I think this is a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For your time, for being with us. We are huge admirers of your work.
Oh, thank you.
And all that you're doing and championing for young children.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome anytime.
Great supporters of that, because we want to support children any way we can.
Yes.
And what a perfect way to do it.
If we support them now, they'll support us at some point, right?
Hopefully.
We want that to create a society that looks after us as we get old.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's always the hope that for a better future, isn't it?
It is.
That
it
does start with us.
It really does. And it's so cheesy, but we are, with these new approaches that we're putting in place, we are making the world a better place. And I know that sounds, it's so cheesy, but I honestly believe it with my whole being that actually, if we put these things in place for our young people and our children, and we start shifting the patterns, the legacies and the traditions and things that have led to so many adults struggling, that actually the outcomes are not just for our one child or our two children or our settings. They are for our greater society and our global community. And I know I could, I literally I could talk about this for days, as I said, and you know, I'm so passionate about it because I just think we're making such a difference to so many elements within the world.
Let's change the world, everybody.
Let's do it, my
Yes.
friends.
Yes.
Let's do it. One step at a time. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it together.